Welcome to this week's episode of Life Unpotted. We're so excited to be here with you for the next hour or a little bit less.
Hey guys, it's Sophie. Thanks so much for joining us again. We're flying along. We're on episode 14. I'm feeling really excited about the community that we're building, connecting with you guys on social media. And if you haven't, reach out to us.
We are hearing from you on social media and we love to hear it. So we've only heard positive feedback so far. If you have any constructive feedback, we love to hear that as well. But nonetheless, we love to hear from you regardless.
So today we're going to be talking about happiness. Happiness, I think, is such a loaded word. It is so multifaceted. There are so many different lenses to approach happiness from. And I think that we kind of all are, I think it's safe to say, everyone on this planet is striving for happiness, right? Everybody wants to feel happy. And I had looked up the definition of happiness or being happy before today's episode, and the definition I found was being content or satisfied in a situation. And I was really surprised by this definition because I think historically speaking, when we think about happiness and maybe the way it's been portrayed, the way it has been portrayed on social media before authenticity started to, permeate TikTok. And I think happiness was kind of, showing that you were on a nice vacation. Happiness was showing that you just got married. Happiness was showing that you got the latest designer bag or you are up to date with trends. Happiness seems like it was a very shallow concept. And I think because of this, because happiness has been something that we kind of have not been clearly taught. We didn't grow up and people sat down and it's like, okay, here are the nuances behind happiness. Here is how you could try to have a happy life. None of that. So we kind of are left hanging, having to answer this. And I think what that resulted in was feeling like it's impossible to be happy. And it's in my experience, what has happened is that I've spent so much of my life striving for happiness, looking for happiness, that I think it was that striving that has made me so unhappy. But on another end, I also think there have been a lot of things I've been doing in my life that aren't aligned with who I really am. So I think we can kind of break this episode into two parts. We can break it up into the importance of not striving for happiness, recognizing that happiness is something that is really a state of mind. It isn't something you're going to always experience. And on the other end of things, talking about, how sometimes we aren't happy and how sometimes we do have to shift our life a little bit to get more aligned, to connect with ourselves, to figure out how do we really want to live this life. So with that being said, I think, Daisy, was that enough intro to get started on this topic? This confusing but so important topic.
Yes, it is a great introduction. I was just writing a few things down because I was equating in my head what gets you to happiness and what gets you to unhappiness. And it seems like everything leads back to accepting the moment that you have for what it is. That doesn't mean saying you're not going to necessarily try to change it, but it does mean accepting that you can't change it in this very, very moment. And I think this is a really interesting and not easy thing to do because when our mind makes up that we don't like the position we're in, we start to think we can't change the position we're in if we've been in it for a long time. So I think a lot of what can make us unhappy is the continuous telling this narrative to ourselves that we hate this position, we're so unhappy, and that continues to weigh us down. So I think the pin that pops the bubble always leads back to acceptance. And this is a huge topic, but that's my initial thoughts on what you said. I think that all things point back to being present, to be content, to be happy. Because if we're striving for happiness that's outside of us, that's going to lead us to be unhappy. But then if we're like, okay, we actually accept this, then that's going to lead us to feel more content, which is in the definition of happiness. So I think another thing is what you were saying was interesting of, you had this definition of happiness being this shallow concept of kind of what took you to be happy was checking off being on a nice vacation, getting engaged, getting married, these things, these moments. You made it sound like happiness is just checking off these life events. When in reality, I think if the way you described it, if you have a mindset of just, well, the next thing that's gonna make me happy, the next thing that's gonna make me happy, you're never actually in the moment appreciating for the moment you're in. You're not actually appreciating that thing. And I think that's the exact opposite of being content and happy. So interesting take.
Definitely. When I first got into mindfulness and all this stuff, I was reading and listening to a lot of Tara Brach. To listeners out there, if you haven't checked her out, she's great. And one of the things she talked a lot about was the wanting mind. How our minds constantly are operating to want things. We wake up in the morning, we're thinking about lunch. We're eating lunch, we're thinking about dinner. It's Saturday night and we're thinking about what are we going to do next weekend. I think evolutionary, we are built to be future oriented, to plan. That was kind of a survival instinct. But what I've learned a lot in therapy and just all the self-reflection I'm doing is that tendency just doesn't work, right? Because when you're constantly thinking about the future, when you're constantly thinking about what am I going to do next, we start to always be focusing on everywhere but right now. We start to live our life in the future. And kind of exactly what you're saying, Daisy. It's like, how many times have we heard, I'll be happy when? I remember when I first started working when I graduated college, and actually when I graduated law school. When I first started working after graduating law school, I was miserable. I remember being like, wow, I hate this. I hate getting up every day and going to work. I hate everything about this. I started feeling so anxious. I was so anxious all the time. So I started planning for the weekends. As soon as Monday hit, I was like, I need the weekend to come. I need the weekend to come because finally when the weekend comes, I will be okay. I will be relieved. I will be away from this job. And what that led to was an unhealthy cycle of living for literally, if you count Friday, right, 3 days out of 7 days of the week, less than a majority of the week. And the other days I spent resisting. I spent feeling like I want the weekend. I don't want to be working. And it took me many years to come to the realization that it was, yes, while maybe there was something else I wanted to do in my life. I eventually left that job. My career trajectory right now is switching entirely. But it was not that situation that was making me unhappy. It was me thinking I didn't want to be there. And I just want to really quickly just paint this with an example. Like, it really goes back to the whole example of our mindset controls everything, and then what you resist persists. And the more you sit there and the more you think about how you hate this job, you hate where you are in life, you are telling yourself that we're unhappy right now. Okay? So you're like, all right, self, I am determining I'm unhappy right now. This sucks. All this negative self-talk is building and building and building. And before you know it, the next Monday comes and you've created this thinking pattern of thinking that you can never be happy until the weekend hits. And that is so dangerous because that will lead you to unhealthy habits. And I just think, I don't know if that's repetitive, I just think that like I lived in that for so long. And if I could talk to my younger self, I'd say, hey, you don't have to wait for the weekend to be happy. You could be happy now.
It's a totally new concept. I think another example that's common in the unhappiness realm is you always have a friend or a friend of a friend who is deeply unhappy because they are single. They think that in order to be happy, they need to have a significant other. They need to have a partner. And I was thinking about this recently as I was talking with a friend about this, who we knew someone who was unhappy because they were single. And my thought was, well, I understand because I am in a relationship with Sophie and I'm super needy and a lot of intimate personal needs are met within a relationship. And that's, as human beings, like we need that intimacy. We need to be seen up front. So I was like, if I was in that situation, I was single and I felt like I was not getting what I need at it. So I started to ask myself, like, if I was single, like, what would be causing me to be unhappy? For me, it would probably be that I didn't have that intimate relational support with someone. So I started asking, it's like, well, where can you go to get that? You know, there's communities that you can find that you can carve out for yourself. And I think that is a beauty of being single, is that reframing it as there is no one that is holding you back because you find comfort. You're able to have to force yourself into these uncomfortable situations to grow, to have these deep connections with people, since you're craving that deep connection. So I think it's always important when you're telling yourself, I'm unhappy because of the situation and I feel helpless in being able to change it. Well, it's asking yourself, how can I show up for myself and fill that need that I think that this thing that I'm needing is going to make me happy? That's going to make me happy. Well, it's like, how can you stop and say, I can make myself happy. I can set myself up for success. Because there are people who are have been single their entire lives and they're like so happy. So it's definitely possible. I think it's one of those things that you have to reframe how you think about it. And I think this can be applied to so many things in our life. But I think that's a really, really big example that we see, especially in our late 20s.
No, I think when I was single, I had such bad anxiety because I was like, I want to be in a relationship. I want to be in a relationship. And what I later found out after being in a relationship, and this is similar to basically everything in life, is that the problems you think that are going to go away when you meet some sort of future outcome, they may disappear for like a few months, but they're there and they're going to follow you. So it's not about getting in the relationship. It's not about getting that job, because yes, that might be a temporary distraction, but all that it really is a distraction. And those problems of anxiety, of fear, uncertainty, feeling like you're not good enough, nothing can fix that. Another person will not be able to solve that. Your partner, when you're in a relationship, you will not be any more whole and complete than you are right now. And this is where I think it comes down to. I think a lot of the reason why we feel so unhappy is because how often we use should in our vocabulary. I should be somewhere else right now. I shouldn't be single. I should be at a different job. I should be excelling in my career. I should be doing all these other things than what my life is actually giving to me right now. And we start thinking that like we should not be living the life we're living. We start getting caught up with this idea that where we are now in life is not good enough, and it's not where we should be. So in this situation, you have one or two options. Either you say, okay, the situation is not where I want to be, and because there's a logical and practical route for me to take to modify this, right? If I don't want to be at my job, okay, let me start thinking about where I want to be. Let me start planning that. Let me start, researching after work. Okay, let me take action. Versus, I just hate all this and I'm going to ruminate and then there's nothing I could do about it. And then that is like, and I'm just going to feel so miserable all the time. So I think either you take action in your life if there's a logical course, or you say, this is just where I am right now, and accept. And in both routes, you have to accept. But I think when we get so unhappy is when we start resisting every single thing. Mm-hmm. And that, I think, resistance is unhappiness.
Mm-hmm. So I kind of want to take it back a notch and think, why do we place so much value on what we have and what we do as means to make us happy? It's almost like we are told this idea that there is a list of things that are going to make us happy, and once we get those, we'll be happy. And I feel like our society has placed a lot of value on people who achieve specific things and who have specific things. And I think it's good to encourage innovation and growth so that we can move forward as a society, but I think it has reached a certain threshold where it feels like the teeter-tottering is going down too much because we've put too much emphasis on the external. And this alienates us from realizing that happiness comes from within. And you can have happiness come from within and still strive to have these things, whether it's material items or it's achieving statuses. Like, it's not saying you can't still achieve those, but I think it's important to remember that happiness doesn't come from that. You can have happiness now while still working towards that. Because every person, we were watching a documentary on Jim Carrey last night, who is really fascinating. But he was like, what made me kind of change my entire life was achieving everything I ever wanted and realizing it meant nothing. So I think we have to find purpose on the journey and find happiness in the journey, and it all starts from within.
Yeah, I mean, it was so fascinating to watch that documentary on Jim Carrey because, you know, he is one of the most successful comedian actors out there, and he had major depression. He suffered from major depression. And what he shared is just that, like, he realized time after time again, when he got all those things that he wanted, it didn't change him. And I think that, like, this is something I think that sometimes you just have to learn from experience. You have to learn from getting that thing you want, because you start to recognize after you get it that, like, now what?
Right. And I think that has almost been set as such a precedent that we have to get to that point, realize how unhappy we are, even though we've achieved all these things we wanted. It almost feels like that is the only way to have success, is to work really hard and suffer and get to that place and realize I didn't need to suffer so much to get everything that I wanted. All I had to do was accept everything and then continue to work hard and still get those things. So basically what I'm saying is that for it can feel like you have to suffer in order to succeed. And I don't know if that's just me, like, where suffering equates success. But I think just really trying to reframe it as happiness doesn't come from suffering at all. You don't have to work for happiness. You don't have to work for happiness. That's it. Everyone can be happy, if so they choose. And it's more difficult for some people because some people are in more difficult situations.
100%.
There's more barriers, but ultimately it's from within.
So I think what we definitely need to talk about here is advertising and marketing, because what's that face you just gave? You're like, oh no, I spent my years in advertising.
No, I wasn't expecting that.
Well, okay, but I think it's...
You don't have to explain it. I'm curious.
Okay, well, I think it is... Okay, we were talking a lot about today about how all our thoughts, everything, the way we perceive this world is based on what input we are consuming, right? So advertising is our primary source of input. We might not even realize it, but the way that ads target you, you know, they have our data, they know how to target you, right? So, for example, even simply a car commercial that says, you know, the car commercial comes on, it paints a picture of this person who's driving the car and like a beautiful scenery. And I've seen like for example, like Range Rover commercial, and they're like, your life will change. Like something so like soulful.
Subliminal. It's subliminal. It's deeply subliminal.
But it's such a deep feeling that they're equating from a material good, from an external good. So okay. True. How do I be happy? Well, you know, this advertisement got into my head subconsciously to make me think that, well, I have to go get that. Literally. How do I get that? Yeah. I have to hustle. I have to make money.
It's everywhere.
It's everywhere. Every single thing is an advertisement.
Yeah.
And I think when you recognize that, like, consumers are, as a consumer, you are being targeted to buy things. So brands' marketing strategies are to make you feel like you need more things. Mm-hmm. Our world is literally driven on making people feel like they're incomplete, making people feel like they need something. Because guess what? If everyone in the world was quote unquote enlightened and felt like their happiness came from within, what would happen to our advertising? What would happen to our consumer trends in the way that people purchase things? Would you have everybody waking up every morning and going and getting a coffee every single morning? Okay, maybe coffee's not the best example, but would everybody be in Soho shopping on the weekends? Or would they be journaling? And would they be doing yoga? Would they be doing more self-reflective things that they realize give them a longer term, more permanent, sustainable, and cheaper, depends what yoga studio you go to, cheaper way of finding and sustaining happiness? So the thing is that is so important to highlight here is that the way that our happiness is marketed is such that happiness is something that is linked to an external commodity, and there's always going to be a new thing that you have to go and buy. And if you don't have that, you're not going to be complete. You're not going to be good enough. And so goes the rat race of chasing, even to the point, I need a new iPhone. Oh, my camera's not good enough. But we don't subconsciously realize that we are attaching our value system to that external item.
Yeah.
And it's not our fault because that is how advertising works. So I'm not trying to say advertising is bad by any means, but it's like, be aware that that is so ingrained in our mind that, you see the models, like, for example, like you see like Victoria's Secret show or something, and if you're comparing yourself to her body, you're like, oh, I'll never be happy until I can fit into that bathing suit. And it's just like, yeah. So I think to sum that up, the way that consumers are marketed makes us feel like we can't be happy. It makes us feel like happiness is something that we can never get sustainably.
There was a lot of good stuff said there. So there's 3 main points I want to respond back to.
Like we're on a debate floor. Okay, Daisy, let's go. Come on.
Okay, let me go.
Wait, I'm going to pour that tea. Can you give me that?
Yeah.
We're drinking, what is this? Ginger tea?
This is chamomile and
chamomile
mint.
tea. Okay.
Chamomile overpowers the mint.
Kind of late at night.
Okay, so the first thing we were going back to was we were talking about like the subliminal messaging from advertising. Like, one of the things we were talking about earlier, we were planning our move to Austin, and you asked me the question of like, how do you figure something out? And I thought back to this like Jim Carrey documentary, and I was like, I think the way you figure things out is that you consume something that is specific, that is helpful. You sleep on it, and naturally your thoughts are going to kind of guide towards that the next day if you kind of start probing and asking questions. Depending on what the input was, it's going to help you figure out that decision. So leading into the point of advertising, and it's all around us. And I think first of all, like before I kind of like came on this journey, whatever you want to call this journey is, of waking up, becoming more aware, becoming more in touch with myself. On Sundays, Saturdays, I used to go and just throw my money at things, being like, oh, what is the most random thing I can buy to make me feel happy? I would do it all the time. And now I don't do that. And I hardly own anything. I feel like the clothes I wear are still from 3 years ago, because I would rather put money towards other things. But the point in saying that is I'm not a good target for advertisers because I'm not looking to fill a void in myself. And 3, and I once was there where I was looking to fill a void by consuming things. And those people are very vulnerable. I was very vulnerable. I think it's shifted a lot away. I think this is pretty obvious, but I think just to be very clear, it shifted a lot away, obviously, from like TV, radio, billboards. The biggest thing I think we fall prey to is feeling like we need to consume is from influencers. I think that's probably where a lot of ad spend goes. And it is really low key of like, oh, we see this person's lifestyle. I want to have their lifestyle. So I need to buy this product. I need to buy the clothes they have. I need to buy the earrings they just bought. And I think it's almost even more dangerous. Well, it's not, nothing is bad, because I think none of this is bad. I also want to be clear about that.
I think it's also important to note, like, nothing's ever bad. We're talking more so about when things go out of hand without being noticed, there's consequences. So there's nothing wrong with shopping, and like, of course, but just be aware of like, what is your intention really here? I
think more so what I was saying was, if it goes unlooked at, it's dangerous for the person to think, oh, in order to have any sort of happiness, my life needs to look exactly like this lifestyle influencer. So I think it's the separation of being like, oh, wow, like I really value this lifestyle influencer. I think what they stand for is really great. I really appreciate them. They have some really great products. I'm going to go buy something that they recommend because I really agree with it. Versus saying like, oh my gosh, I need to, in order to be happy, I need to buy everything that they tell me they recommend. So I think it's just two different mindsets, really. And nothing's wrong with consuming. Consuming is great.
Yeah.
I think that it's just mindful consuming and understanding why you're buying something.
Right. And on a very similar note, so much has to do with when you're only being exposed to certain types of lifestyle, certain types of people, your brain won't be able to recognize that there's other ways to live. And I have very, very much experienced this. living in New York City for the past 7 years, right? When I've thought about, okay, where do I really want to live? How do I really want to spend my life? Contemplating, say we lived upstate in a house, not in the city. My brain immediately is like, whoa, you're going to get bored. What are you going to do? And that's because living somewhere like Manhattan, there is so much stimuli all the time. There are so many options. And if you talk to someone who's, lived out in Joshua Tree for the past year, or Yucca Valley, or somewhere in the desert, their point of reference as to what they need is so different.
Mm-hmm.
So
their input is quite different.
Input is entirely different.
Yeah.
And the way we perceive reality is entirely based on our input. So
totally,
we get such limited viewpoints if we're only if we're only living in one city, if we're only interacting with the same people who we went to high school with and college with, who come from the same kind of towns as us, and we're not thinking further than that. Because the point I'm trying to make with happiness here is that when we're only seeing one certain type of lifestyle, or we're only seeing life be lived a certain way, we're not seeing that there's so many other ways to live life, and therefore you don't need to have this one boxed way of living to be happy. Do you know, I don't know. I think honestly, this is just so important to hone in that the people who live around you are not the only people on this earth. There are so many other ways to live. There are people out there who literally live in the mountains and are happy. There are people out there who live across the globe, completely different lifestyles, and are happy. Having perspective to understand will give you more options to think about. Okay, I don't need to try so hard to fit in here, to do all these things here, because if I don't, I won't be happy. If I don't have this job, I won't be happy. It's like, hey, wait, maybe there's other ways to live, right? We don't need the path to happiness to be so fixed, you have to make $500,000 by this age, you have to be married by this age. It's like, that is just one small subsection of the population who's living that way.
Okay, so really good point. I want to reflect that back to you, that there's not only one way to be happy. There's not only one way to be happy. And happiness is sold to us in specific ways, because that is what's going to get you to buy a product.
Yeah.
So I think it's defining your own happiness. And that's a great tool of social media, is that you can connect with someone in a different country. You can see the way that they're living and realize that you can live that way too if you want to go live there. There's so much infinite opportunity with understanding diversity of how people live their life. And I think that you're right. When you get so attuned into one environment that you feel like the way to happiness is fixed based off what everyone around you is doing, and you're like, this doesn't feel right, I guess I can't be happy because this is not what I want. You can always change that. There's a different place for you. There's infinite ways to be happy. So I think that's just a really good point. Because it is important to realize you don't have to mold yourself to fit something that doesn't feel right.
Yeah, and then I think this kind of comes down to the next subsection of happiness is okay, happiness sometimes can really, really mean sometimes that you're not aligned with yourself. I think on some section, on one end, not feeling happy all the time can be because you're resisting, you're wanting to be somewhere else, you're so caught up in the future, you are looking to external things to make you happy, you want to be everywhere but here. But on the other end, if we're talking about happiness in the sense of being content and satisfied, yes, of course, you can be content and satisfied anywhere. But you know what? That's not realistic all the time, right? I think I am really practicing waking up every day and being present every day. But look, that's hard, and that's hard to get there. And I encourage you to try to get there. But we also have to be realistic and understanding that life is really hard. And so what makes life a little more easier, a little more feeling like you have a little more purpose, is when you're feeling a sense of alignment with what you're doing.
Mm-hmm. Not even what you're doing, with how you're interacting with the world.
Yes, with how you're interacting with the world.
Yeah.
Where you're living, the people you're seeing, what you're doing every single day when you wake up, the community you're in.
Or just how you're interacting with yourself, how you're viewing things. Because I think what you said of unhappiness can be a direct lead back to realizing you're not connected to yourself.
Definitely, but I think what I'm trying to say here, though, is like, I think that is so important. But what about the fact that, like, you're living this life with friends you're no longer connected to, or you're, like, still at a job you don't want to be in, or you're still in a relationship you don't want to be in? To an extent, yes, happiness is within completely. Every single day we can determine our mindset. But our environment matters.
Totally. And yeah, you can do so much work on your mindset, try to make an environment work, but at some point you might just realize you've outgrown it.
Like a fish can't swim out of water.
Yeah. And I think that I think you can do as much as you can in that moment. I mean, I just left my job because I was like, this is no longer for me. I tried to make it work for so long and try to add other things into my life. But eventually, yeah, exactly what you're saying. You realize you outgrow something and it's holding you back from blossoming into what you've been working on so hard. So I think it's being aware of knowing when it's time to make that big shift in your life. And I think that sometimes can feel scary and confusing. But I think ultimately you have to go through those feelings to ever get to that state of happiness again. Because it might be that you have done everything you possibly can in the current situation, and you're unhappy because you're no longer growing. And maybe the situation that you're in, you can't possibly grow with it anymore. And it's holding you back. And that's a very real possibility because it's still taking a lot of energy from you. And sometimes I feel like when you need to grow, when you're stagnant, that can drain your energy and make it really hard for you to move forward. So I just think that it's really important to know where you're at and to give yourself the kudos when you deserve it, when you've put a lot of work in, and say, hey, it's time for the next thing, because you never want to be stagnant.
Really good point, because like going back to the definition of happy, being content or being satisfied, and it's like happiness isn't waking up every morning and going to the beach and like drinking margaritas. Okay, maybe that is, but someone, but
no, in some moments.
But it's like what I'm trying to say is like happiness doesn't mean you have an easy life. Like I think equating happiness for comfort, happiness means I'm going to be comfortable, is not good. You know those nights where you're like about to go to bed and you're like you had a really great busy day and you feel really satisfied. You did so much and you felt like you felt like you like learned something. You felt like you're growing. I think a lot of what happiness really comes down to is like, are we engaged? Are we engaged with what we're doing in life? Are we learning? Are we growing? And I think the second you stop evolving, the second you start searching for, I want the easy way out. I want the comfortable life, because, you know, a comfortable life, I think I'll be happy when I can finally retire and all these things. And it's just like, I don't think that's what it's going to make you happy. And I've learned from my experience that doing these things that are challenging, starting this podcast, posting on social media, working through my insecurities, that is what's making me feel satisfied. Versus when I was not doing any of that work 2 years ago and I was trying to go down this traditional path, sure, that might have felt simple. Sure, that might have felt comfortable. Sure, that might have felt easy. But happiness is not taking the easy route. I think happiness is being satisfied. And being satisfied comes oftentimes when you're growing and when you're learning and when you're challenging yourself.
Absolutely. And I think a good point to make here is that challenge is difficult. It's uncomfortable, but it's manageable. I think, and this is maybe just me, but in the past, I equated challenge as something that I knew I was being challenged if I was suffering. And that actually was just self-sabotaging. And I was in the wrong environment. I wasn't doing the right thing for myself. And it takes time to learn that. But I think ultimately it's so important because challenge is difficult. It's not putting you in a state where you're so overwhelmed that you are in paralysis. It's manageable things that you can move through, work through, build on, and then take on more challenge. I think that's something that if you want happiness in your life, you have to be able to recognize when it's time to create new challenge in your life and to move through it. And then you're chilling for some time, and then next you got to throw the challenge back in. You have to continue to challenge yourself, because what you said, that satisfactory sleep you have after a hard day's work, you have to be challenging yourself, and
in a healthy way.
Yeah. And I think I got stuck into this mindset with the job I was in that was like, oh, like I work from home. I don't have to give much to it. I know how to be good at my job, and I know how to clock in. I know how to clock out. But I realized like that was draining me, even though I had a lot of flexibility, because I wasn't being challenged. And I think I want to be challenged for more days. Yes. And it was challenging to work all the time, podcast, do this and that. And eventually got to a point where that was no longer challenging. And that was why I realized it's time for me to make a decision, to make a very scary challenge of leaving my job to do something else that I'm not entirely sure that I'm doing. So I think just the main point I'm trying to get at here is that challenge is good. We need to know when we haven't been challenged and it's been too long.
Yeah. Good point.
Because maybe it has nothing to do with what we're even doing. I think this is where it's like, if you have a calling to do something, so anything else you're doing is not going to make you happy because you want to do this one thing so bad. But otherwise, I think when we aren't aware of exactly what we feel super passionate about, the next thing we take is challenge, because we want to grow. That's the desire. And I think the more we challenge, the more we desire, the more we grow, eventually we're going to get to a place where we're like, I want something different. And that's where you pivot.
So I think life is constantly challenging and pivoting.
Life is challenge. I think that's misconception. It's not to live an easy life that eventually gives us to a life of relaxation, or a hard life that eventually gives us to a life of relaxation. It's like finding the balance if possible.
It's like challenge yourself while relaxing into challenging
Relaxing into the challenge.
Relaxing
I like
into
that.
the challenge.
I like that. Relax. That's going to be the name of this. Actually, I don't know if that makes sense for this podcast episode, but relax into the challenge. I really like that.
Yeah, we could do another episode talking about like what makes a challenge, because like you said, every time you overcome something, it's no longer difficult anymore, because what made it challenging was the discomfort of learning it. And eventually throughout life, the more things you do, what was once so hard for you is now so easy. So that's why you need to keep doing more things.
Yeah.
Because then life is just like,
you don't ever want to get to a place where you're complacent.
No.
And not being challenged.
Great.
And challenge could be as simple as waking up 30 minutes earlier so that you can have more time in your day.
And challenge for me is just like, okay, how am I going to be present today? That's a challenge I've really been working on. How am I not going to react when my water spills over my bag, almost my computer? What happened the other day?
I think a challenge I've been realizing is like when, like, if you listen to Eckhart Tolle, is when the pain body is activated and feeding into that. Or like when you're walking in New York and someone's 2 inches away from you and you feel their negative energy of being mad that they're close to you. And it's like, we're all mad that we're close to each other, but just realizing that, okay, I'm not going to feed into it. I'm not going to get mad. I'm just going to kind of laugh that we bumped into each other. So I think
don't take life so seriously.
Right. Not taking life so seriously, because I think that can lead to unhappiness.
So if I'm going to sum up the conversation of like, we started the episode posing the question of like, what is happiness really? And I think what we kind of touched on a very larger level is happiness is recognizing that you have to accept where you are in life. You can't resist where you are in life. You can't want your life to be any different than it is, because the second we start resisting, we resist persists. The more that we hate what we're doing, the more that hatred's going to build. It's going to cloud our life. And also on one hand, happiness is really being where your feet are, being in the moment, being here, engaging, and recognizing that happiness really is within. And then the other end of it, happiness is recognizing that you have to be satisfied with what you're doing in life. So finding that delicate balance of recognizing happiness is within, being mindful, being present, but also relaxing into challenge, engaging into difficult tasks, trying to challenge yourself, trying to grow. And I think if you could be present through your growth, maybe that's the formula to happiness.
Yes, be present through the growth and be aware of what your input is.
And be aware of what your input is.
Because that could be implicating you in ways that you're not necessarily aware of.
Wow, this is like a formula.
Okay, well, we'll get back to you on the official formula. In theory.
And one thing
we'll create a hypothesis.
As we keep doing this, we're going to start to like unravel, like, can you really be happy while doing your passions? And I think that that's a really important thing to talk about, because there's so much misconception, like you can't be happy when you're doing your passion. And what I probably will think is that like all the same shit comes up, but you're more satisfied. It's a balance. Everything's balanced.
Right. And it's more off. I think it's like more peaks and more valleys, more constant peaks and valleys of like, oh my gosh, you have to get through it. Oh, okay, I got through it. Now I'm like in another valley.
Right.
And now I'm in another peak, and it's more constant.
I think the valleys get shorter because you stop resisting them.
Yes, they get shorter, but because you move through them more quickly. Exactly.
That's actually really true. Like the more that you do self-reflection and you stop resisting and you relax into where you are in life, these down points of not feeling content, you realize that when you stop resisting a feeling, you kind of come back into flow state. And the only thing that was ever making you feel miserable was the fact that you're resisting that in the first place. Mm-hmm. It always comes down to that.
Every episode comes back to that.
It's like, but you have to go through the layers because it's complex. So
it's so complex.
What a great topic.
This was great. This was really great. I mean, look, we still have not received a voice message from any of our listeners.
Who's going to be the first?
Who's going to be the first one?
Someone send us a voice message. I really want to hear what it would be like.
We'll play it. It'll be so fun.
Yeah, we'll play it on the podcast.
We'll respond to it.
And
that's a new feature through Spotify.
I think it's Spotify. So send us a voice message. Send us a voice message.
There's actually a link. There's a link in the show notes.
Yeah.
So you can just click on that. I think you record and you can send it to us.
Yeah. So send us a voice message to Spotify because that'd be really fun and we want to get our first one.
Okay. So I'll pose to make it even easier of a lift to give us a voice message. So let us know how you decided, or let us know how you identified resistance in your life and how you're going to decide to move through it. Or if you don't want to say that, give us any other questions that you might have in mind. But that could be a helpful one because everything we talk to leads back to resistance.
Or tell us why are you struggling to be happy right now in your life? Yeah. I think it's a good one.
So thank you for listening. We love having you, as if we're hosting you in our living room. I feel like
our listeners.
And please, please, please share this with your friends and family. Just send it to them if you think they might enjoy it.
Share it on social media, Instagram.
Share it on Instagram. Share it.
Facebook. Whatever.
With everyone you love in your life. And then please rate us if you like it. However you would like to judge us, please put it. We'll love it no matter what it is because we know we're having engaged.
Our values are within, so if you give me 1 star, I'll be okay.
We just want to engage with everyone. So we'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to read our blog that came out yesterday. We have a new blog post every single Monday. Also, that's going to be linked below. So check it out. We love to connect with you all. And that's all I have to say.
All right. We hope this episode was helpful. It was really fun to record. So thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day. If it's the beginning of your day, we were about to go to bed. Have a good night's sleep. And we'll talk to you next Tuesday.
Adios.